What's going on, world? It's day 5 of the 2022 Alternative Winter Break Media Arts Edition. My name is Mazi Mutafa, Executive Director of Words Meets in Life, and I'm super excited to have a conversation today with Asia Clark. Asia Clark has been an educator for over 15 years, and Asia's been involved in mentoring activities that promote literacy for young adults and reluctant readers. Her work includes creating public accessibility to state educational policies, updating policies to reflect 21st century education goals, and developing relationships with various institutions in the DC area. Asia's often behind the scenes sprocket and connector for programming and enjoys planning or facilitating programs in music, arts, and culture. Asia holds a BA in English Literature from Rutgers University and a Master's in Education and Educational Leadership from Wilmington University. An enthusiastic lover of music and culture, in her spare time, Asia enjoys concerts, domestic and international travel, and various arts-focused activities. Sounds like Asia's got a passport full of stamps that we want to learn more about. What's going on, Asia?
That's funny. That was weird hearing myself. Like, that's weird. Oh my goodness.
Well,
How's it
thank you
going?
so much for making time for this conversation. You are my 5th guest in this week that's really dedicated to helping young people learn about career paths that they might not be super aware of. It is interesting that I'll be honest, it wasn't intentional that literally every single person I interviewed had at least had an advanced degree,
Mm,
which is also just kind of interesting to know so many of the people that are in kind of creative spaces, the role that education and advanced education has played in their lives. I've kind of liked to run these interviews pretty similarly. Um, I don't generally prepare questions. I like to kind of listen to what you say and then ask questions about the things that you share. But there's
yeah.
only one or maybe two questions that have been consistent on all interviews, and it's the first one. The first one, I love to know how much people know about their own family history. So I like to ask, who is the oldest ancestor that you're aware of? And it's okay if it's your grandparents or great grandparents. I talked to someone yesterday who knew 8 generations of her family. It was the most anybody I've ever talked to in life knew, which was so amazing to learn. But who is your oldest ancestor that you are aware of?
It's really interesting question because I know we kind of had like a prep and I had to sit back and think about this. There was a time where I could reach out and speak to, my grandmother on both sides, not too long ago. In the last 7 years, I had my grandmother up until I was 35. So right now, the oldest ancestor in my family is like 75, which I think, in for all intents and purposes, is young. Um, and we try and keep in contact with them to kind of get some information and just keep just lineage and just the family heritage going, because we now are the patriarchs and the matriarchs of the family, myself, my generation, my cousins, my siblings.
Well, that's a beautiful thing to have that responsibility.
Yeah,
And thinking about your own parents, maybe could you share a little bit about them? Who are they? Where are they from? Maybe even
sure.
how they met?
Yeah. My parents actually are old school. When I say that, they went to high school together, and they went to the prom together. And so, my mom and dad are both from Philadelphia. They moved right over the bridge to a town in New Jersey, Willingboro. Both my parents were very community um, activists, involved in the community, very deep in ministry. Both athletes, both educators and educated, and just wonderful people. I don't have them anymore, and I often think about it more often how great my parents were, because they were so many to so many different people. We had an open door policy for people. My father was a longtime educator in a town. He retired after like 39 years teaching in the same school, and just enjoyed that role of teaching. And I got a lot of exposure for culture from them. And unfortunately, they had a zest for life, and really, like, in their retirement, were really looking forward to traveling, but unfortunately were plagued with illness, and they had to kind of take put that as a back seat. But I have learned so much from them, as far as like public service, how to care for people, care for yourself, self-care, relationships, personal, and professional. So my mom and dad, like, they, I think they used to always joke they grew up together, literally.
Hmm.
They were husband and wife, but my mom always said, like, he's like my brother. He's my friend. He's like, there's so many different roles that marriage plays, but when you're with somebody for over 50 years, I can definitely understand how that can, weave in and out.
Did you say what your mom did, or was she
For my
a
mom,
homemaker?
for most of my life, my mom was actually a stay-at-home mom. But she was a business major. She worked for the federal government. She actually worked on the internet before the internet was the internet.
Hmm.
So we didn't always know what my mom did, because everything she did was kind of top secret. She
She was like,
um
I could tell you, but I got to kill you
Yeah, like
afterwards.
she would tell us later, like, "Oh, I know all about that. I had a debit card back in the early '80s," and we're like, "No, you didn't." And she's like, "Actually, I did." So, but that was her background. But by the time I came along, she was retired.
So one of the things I love to know for folks that are working in the creative space is, when did that start? Like, what is your earliest memory of doing something creative? And creative can be however you define it. It could be,
Mm.
singing, it could be dancing, it could be drawing. What's your earliest creative memory? And when did creativity? Yeah.
I think my earliest creative memory would be as a little girl, because I there are in my house, we still have our childhood home. There are papers that my mom kept that show me doodling. I doodled as early as 3, and I still doodle. So you see books that have my creations in it. And I definitely give kudos to my mom for exposing me to art early. Um, my mom put us in, robotics class in the summertime. We used to go to more College of Art in Philadelphia in the summertime for enrichment. All of the free classes before they had like those places where you could do the pottery classes and things like that. My mom would find um, community programs, the Perkins Art Center within the community, for myself and my siblings to take part. And I just really loved it. I loved it. And I always took an art class as, an elective. I always had some type of interest. And then I think my first concert was 6. I remember my mom took me to see Anita Baker, because my dad said he didn't want to go. So she said, "Okay, well, I'm taking Asia." So between drawing and just that exposure and music, it's always been a part of my life.
I love the answer to this question, in part because part of the reason why I asked the question is because I want to encourage parents or teachers to recognize that it is really almost never too soon to be encouraging a young person's creativity. And so, with that, you talked about being in elective art classes. What
Mhm.
are some? When did that start? Is that elementary school? Is that middle school?
That was elementary school. So even like with the specials, I remember being, little, and they taking us out for art. There was a program that was for talented students, and I was able to go to that program, and that was elementary school, and that started like first grade. So, those things, it is important, because when they, meaning educators, see the talent, and they say, okay, let's hone on this, let's, nourish it. Um, it does start as early as soon as you put a pen or pencil or crayon or something in a child's hand. And so for me, it was definitely elementary school, because I think by the time I got to kindergarten, I have older siblings, and my sister, she taught me how to read and write. She would sit down, I was her little student. So I had like this thirst for knowledge and all of that very early on. So I was able to kind of take part in some special programs pretty early.
Well, that sounds really important that your school recognized that at an early age, but then
Mhm.
also made investments in your development as a child to be able to develop those skills and talents. But at the same time, you had family at home that were
Right.
willing and able to do the same. And so it feels like that this is an important kind of signpost moment to point back to as being critical to your
Yes.
development as just a person, but also as a creative. So after elementary school, you move into middle school. Are there any kind of memories that you have of participating in programming or after school programming, place of worship, like what some sort of activity that's happening in middle school, or does it happen in high school?
Yeah. So I think one of the things for me, I appreciate it. So my father, as I mentioned, he was a teacher. He was really good at organizing. So um, his role growing up was always putting together functions for the kids to get involved in some type of physical play, which was great. So I kind of saw my dad put together like field days and field trips and all of these different things. Um, and that's something that I would help him with. And that structure was really important for me. By the time I got to seventh grade, um, my interest kind of changed to more so design. I started to take classes that were like architectural classes, CAD classes, which is still being a creative. And I just didn't
Hmm.
think of it that way. It's just a STEM focus.
Hmm.
And I started to get involved in programs. We used to have a program for engineering, and we used to go to different organizations that had a focus in engineering to visit and to kind of see, like, what do you want to do when you grow up. So I had this thing in my mind. I want to build bridges. I used to enter contests where we would take like toothpicks and design a structure to see how much weight it could take. And I loved it. So through in high school, um, you know in my younger years, I was taking like dance class, I was taking violin class, and I was taking art classes. When I got to like seventh and eighth grade and then beyond, I was taking those harder math classes, and I was taking computer classes. And I don't want to age myself, but when I was in school, computers looked a little bit different, and I am on the cusp of um, really, we had the code. Like you had to kind of know the DOS system in order to get into anything and to really build anything. So I started to kind of go into that in high school. And the funniest thing was my real love was always English. So I was, in AP classes when it came to English and history and those humanities types classes. So I was always writing. So to me though, when you really think about it, and I definitely didn't know this as an adolescent, as a teenager. I did not know that really what the art of English and the art of writing was
Hmm.
actually an art. I didn't think of that as creativity in the traditional sense. I just figured, oh, this is fun. I enjoy poetry. But I didn't see the intersections of how I enjoyed designing and those STEM classes that I was taking in the same way as designing a paper or designing a poem or designing a story. I didn't think of all those things as the same as design. It wasn't until I became an adult that I saw how my foundation was always layered in design.
This is a beautiful revelation to be able to share, especially for young people who are kind of in the same
Yeah.
situation you were, just kind of making their way through, doing things that they
Mhm.
enjoy, and not necessarily thinking about their connections to each other. Were there adult mentors either in school or outside of school, or was it your older siblings that, for the most part, were there to teach and encourage you? Who were some of the mentors that you can point back to?
Yeah, I had a guidance counselor who I missed so much. She was great. I remember, when we were in high school, you had an alphabet assigned guidance counselor. And my last name is Clark, so I was in the beginning of the alphabet. And Sydney Ivy always had the latter end of the alphabet. And I remember meeting her and just I was attracted to her spirit. And I kind of had some juice because I went to school with my father. So I went up to her and I said, I don't like my guidance counselor. I want you to be my guidance counselor. And she said, well, I can't be your guidance counselor because your last name begins with a C and I in the last part of the alphabet. And I was like, no, I think I want to make this happen. She didn't know that my dad was in the school system. So I had from with her like from the time I met her, probably like a 30-year relationship, pretty much. Um, until her passing, and she was actually one of the first people that told me that I could write.
Hmm.
And um I had just basically wrote a letter asking someone to come to the school to speak, and I asked her to proofread it, and she was like, Asia, I didn't know that you could write like this. I ended up becoming a colleague of hers. So that's how long our relationship lasted. And she helped me throughout every step, education wise. And then even into my secular career. One of the things that I appreciated about her was, I was a scatterbrain, very much so. I reluctantly say that about sometimes a creative, we can be all over the place. She was one of the persons that helped me to create structure. And it what I kind of got it later, but between her and my mom, they provided me the space for the structure, but also the room to kind of make those mistakes and kind of weave in and out. And so those counselors like that give you the space to mess up, and but also don't say that you're messing up, just kind of say like you're experiencing life, this is an experience.
Hmm.
So what did you experience when you were going through this? Those are very important people, because the power of language is so strong, right? And so if you keep saying to somebody, you made a mistake, you got to get it together, you got to figure this out, then that's, discouraging. But if you say like, hey, that didn't work out the way you thought it was going to work out, but let's figure it out. Let's see where you kind of need to reel it back in, or what path could you have taken. So Miss Ivy was somebody who really helped me with that, and I literally met her when I was 14 years old, and she stayed in my life as long as she was on this earth, with those same conversations, when I would leave a job, when I would think about leaving a job, when I wanted to pivot career wise.
I'm curious, was Miss Ivy one of the people that encouraged you to take those more difficult math classes and science classes, or was that self-driven?
So that was self-driven. She encouraged me not to take those math classes because I was not a great math student. So that's the reason why I'm not a civil engineer. So I have really good ideas. I was not really good at executing them, and she probably saw that when I was like in mid-year 10th grade. She's like, "Oh, you kind of having a hard time in this calculus class." So, but she was softly um, directing me. I think sometimes when you have something in your head, you have to see it yourself. I think she recognized that about me very early on. So she allowed me to get the D. My mom allowed me to get the D, but it all worked out by the time I was a senior. Um, and I had definitely had some bumps after that, but those bumps were good bumps. I definitely appreciate it because I kind of went back to that later. So even though I'm not a civil engineer, I was a good designer. I've purchased a home and designed the home. I purchased the home and rehabbed the home. So there was something in there that they saw that they didn't completely take away from me, and then that allowed me to take on different challenges later.
And this is a great point. This idea of doing well in a class versus doing well at applying knowledge are not
Right.
necessarily the same thing.
Right.
Um, and so, because you were good at English, was English your one and only major when you decided to go to Rutgers, or did you get there? I myself, I was a philosophy. No, I was a letters and science major my first semester, and then I became English, and then I became English and philosophy, and
Mm.
then I became English and African American studies.
Mm.
But I gravitated to English because number one, I did it decently, and I was encouraged by my teachers. But I also really just liked the power of writing to be able to share and persuade, which is why I was attracted to philosophy because I enjoyed argument and winning. But eventually, I got frustrated with just listening to people's arguments and tearing them up into little pieces and handing them back to them. And so then I wanted to learn about how to build things based on history, which is where I went to African American studies. So was English where you started and ended, or was that part of a journey as well?
English is where I started, and it is where I ended. In between, I had some thoughts. Did I want to do literature? Did I want to do communications? Did I want to do like journalism, um, education? So I started at one school, and it was English and education. Then I finished with English and African American literature. Um, I've had thoughts of going to law school. I didn't want to do that. I changed my mind very quickly. Um, and what I appreciated about English was just the art of it. I enjoy sophisticated language. I enjoy, I remember what catapulted me into doing African American literature was reading Zora Neale Hurston, and Their Eyes Were Watching God, because that entire book is written in Gullah.
Hmm.
So, when I read that book, I was just like, wait a minute, hold up. It made me completely want to learn a different, um, understanding of my culture. So I kind of weaved in and out, but it was always English. And I tried to take classes that had some type of historical content, but I also ended up in like a logic class. That was one of the best classes that I ever took in college, was this logic class, because it had helped me with my approach to decision making. And one of the things that if I could 100% do without any worry, I would love to just be a professional student for all of my life. If I had like an endless bucket of money to just be in school, I would go to school all the time, all the time. But one of the things that I've learned from, the elders in my life, like my grandmother or my mother, Mrs. Ivy, and other people that I've met along the line, is to make, opportunities present themselves for knowledge so that I can keep it going. So that's why I try and read all the time and read different things. And I think English just always gave me that foundation, to just be open minded about perspective, opinions, ways of writing, people's outlook, their lifestyle. English was so important to me in understanding, just people.
So last year, the book that came up over and over again was the autobiography of Malcolm X, and this
Mm,
year, 2 days in a row, the book that has come up from Tamara Wellens yesterday, who's the DC Grammy chapter president. She brought up Their Eyes Were Watching God too, even
yeah.
had it in the background as one of the major inspirations for her. So I love the fact that the two of my guests this year have also made reference to a seminal book. So if you haven't read it, I know I read it in undergrad. I'd encourage folks to go out and grab a copy. Um, so then you decided to go and get your master's in education
Hmm.
from Wilmington University in educational leadership. What is educational leadership, and why do you need a master's in it?
Right. So I'll fill in some blanks. So I was teaching, and I went back to school to be a counselor.
Hmm.
So I was getting a master's in counseling, and I didn't finish. I did a lot of the coursework, and then when it got to the clinical part where you have to actually do these hours, I said, I don't want to do this. Like, who wants to do this? Okay. But it did make me a great teacher because you got to understand people. I was more understanding and empathetic. Then what I realized, I had this aha moment. I'm working in public service. I'm a teacher. I still don't know what I want to do with my life, Mozzie. That's the crux of it. I've been saying it very nicely, but I just, kind of, I'm a free spirit, and the people in my life who took me on kind of knew this. And if I had it my way, I probably would be taking classes all around the world, like I said, and maybe doing a rain dance. But I did get to a point where I realized I needed some type of higher education to move forward, especially since I was in education. So that's the reason why I went back to school to get a master's in ed leadership, which is really essentially your principalship.
That's what I
So,
thought.
yeah, for all intents and purposes, I'm a certified principal. I did work for a short amount of time as an assistant principal, but it is the MBA of education. You learn business and you learn human resources, another way of learning structure. And it was beneficial, very helpful. Um, and so I went to grad school, and that's actually how I ended up in the Washington, D.C. area, because while I was in grad school, I took an opportunity for an internship. And it was an opportunity where it was like, well, if I look back at this, I might be upset that I didn't do something different. And now that I've been here for almost 8 years, I know that all the experiences that I've had in the last 8 years, I would have been upset with the unknown, because it's been a great experience with the move. So going back to school to do something that I knew that in the long run I didn't want to do was the best decision of my life.
So this is interesting. I didn't realize you'd been in this area for that long. I thought you were a fairly newer transplant from Philadelphia. And so, what are the things that you've been doing since you've been in the DC metro area?
Yeah, so since I've been in this area, I came here. I ended up working with um, the place that I did my internship while I was in grad school. They gave me a job. I was there for a little bit, and I was flitting and flying around.
Which was what? What was that?
I'm sorry, I was working for the Office of the State Superintendent,
Gotcha.
and I was writing policy, which is boring. Um, but I can write, so it worked out great.
Mhm.
And then I said, "Oh, well, I do have this master's you know, in education. Let me use it to be a principal and see if I actually want to do it." And that I did that for a very short time. I did it for a year. And I was like, I do not want to do this. That's how I ended at the library. So one of the things that I will say to young people who are trying to figure it out, I like balance. I think if you were to really look at the tenets of what I'm talking about, is balance. It might be an old school way of thinking. It's definitely newer in some respect, if depending on how old you are. But I think for me, the balance of education, be working, I always had a job. No matter what, I can always teach. I can go back to work tomorrow in a school, whether it's a principal or whatever. It provided a foundation that allowed me to kind of weave in and out. Transitioning to the library, I've been here the longest. So I've been at the library for 5.5 years. Um, since I've been in DC, this is the longest standing job that I've had here. And this position allows me to be the creative person that I am.
So
It,
tell us a little bit about what this position is. So you work at the Martin Luther King Library in Washington D.C. And what's your role, and how have the previous educational and um, personal, creative, and professional experiences come together in this new role?
yeah. So working at the library, for all intents and purposes, I have a very boring title, a very boring government title. I'm a supervisory librarian, but I'm a creative within this structure. We create programs. We have a communications team. I go to them and I say, "Hey, I have an idea. I think we should do a panel on, food. And we can bring in a test kitchen and we can do this. And we have this person coming out with a book and we can connect with this bookstore, this indie bookstore in the city. We put a plan together, we make it happen." What are the skills that I've learned? I've learned production in a different way, how to produce an event with lighting and videography. Um, but it's still being a creative. What are the skills that I've honed in on? Writing. Oftentimes, I have to do an introduction. I have to write the introduction. I have to do research on who I'm introducing. I've also been the person who's been a moderator. So if you're a moderator, you also have to write your questions out, do some research. Those are all things that As a teacher, presentation skills, those are things that I've been doing for years. So it comes into play here. We hold a lot of events. I do a lot of logistics for the events. So if somebody comes in, as you know, Mazi, and we're partnering with an event, I make sure that I have things handled with my staff, knowing where they should be, crowd control, shutting down certain things so that the production goes without a hitch. So my job weaves in and out of a lot of things besides checking out books and buying books.
So it's
That's actually
interesting.
not my job at all.
It's interesting that you're a supervisory librarian without a degree in library sciences, which I would have assumed to be a
Yeah,
librarian you need a degree in that. So was your BA enough or was your master, like what kind of credential did you need in order to have that job? Because if you're a person listening
right.
is like, wow, that's a really great job. I never even knew I could be an events manager, among other things, at a library. But what kind of credentials did Asia need in order to be able to get in that door?
hmm That is actually a great question. I'm glad you asked. Librarianship can and for have a reputation of being elitist. Um, you can't practice law without a law degree, right? You cannot be a doctor unless you have a medical degree. You can't be a teacher unless you have a teaching credential. Same thing with librarianship. Um, you should not have the title of being a librarian unless you have a master's in library science or information sciences. Because I'm a supervisor, that is a different type of skill set. So you have some interchangeable skills, um, but you may or may not be able to be a supervisor of people. People management is a different type of skill, and it is a different type of training. And so that's actually what I am. I manage people and I manage a building as an operationals manager. So if you think about my degree being an
Educational
educational
leadership.
leader, that's
Hmm.
an operational manager. When you a principal manages a building, a principal manages people. They manage adults, they manage children, they manage parents, they manage a board, and they manage relationships. And I've been trained to do that, and I've done that for years, um, all of my career, really. And so, becoming a manager within a library was a very easy transition for me because I can manage a building, and the soups and nuts and bolts of a building that goes from people in the audience. If you've ever been to the MLK Central Library, it's a large building. And so if you have to evacuate, I know how to do that. We do fire drills. If I have to change the schedule, I know how to do that. We've done that as a school. So it's a lot of transferable skill sets. I was the first librarian um, supervisor in the system that does not have an MLS. I was a guinea pig. And so after me, they have afforded people opportunities to do so. They're very specific where they put people like myself because I am not a practitioner and I know that. So while I was an English teacher, I am not a librarian. So there's certain things about that work that I recognize is not my skill set and I leave it to the actual librarians. But there's different buildings within the city where somebody like me, it makes sense to have someone who has a different type of background but knows how to have those interpersonal skills with people to come in to manage the building.
I think you said really politely, Mozzie, my bachelor's degree in English allowed me to write myself into the future that I wanted. So
I'm
I
kind
know
of
how to tell a good story, brother.
kind of smart.
Well, so I wonder because so much of what you do, being a trailblazer in your space, but also being an innovator in terms of the kinds of programming that you're doing, um, what what experiences are you drawing on beyond education? Because I know that, for me,
Hmm.
the impetus around creating Words Beats in Life was the fact that I was the president of the Black Student Union my junior year. I started four other student organizations, and I was a member of Phi Beta Sigma. So I had lots of programming experience, some fundraising experience, some marketing experience, but all of that was outside of the classroom. So for your programming, um, visions, ideas that you execute on, how much of that is coming from that being a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old with your mother at a concert and witnessing what good music sounds like? How much are you drawing on non-curricular experiences in the role that you now play?
Right. So I think it's probably all of it. I have been coined an experienced curator amongst my friend group and just in general. So to kind of tap into that, if somebody is coming to this area, they call me, right? I have friends of friends who will say, "We'll call Asia and ask her what's going on in the city." I have friends who are Washingtonians, been here all of their life, right? Back and forth. And they will say to me, "How did you know that that was going on?" I think because my mom just very early had me reading everything. She worked at night and I was up with her from birth. Like I actually don't sleep that well, that often, right? Because I'm up and I'm reading. I love anything that is a new experience. I'm attracted to it. I'm drawn to it. So that is really where I draw my thoughts from. I will come to work and say, "Hey, I read this in the New York Times or the New Yorker. I think we should create X, Y, and Z here." And, I'm just drawing on the things that I'm reading and experiences. It might be something that I've done on vacation. I try and make my vacations, yes, rest, but also experiences. I love music. So I will travel for music and enjoy myself and relax, but also go to a concert wherever I am or a play wherever I am. So I think that's pretty much what I draw upon to fuel my ideas for my career.
Note to self: next time my wife is trying to drag me to something I don't want to go to, tell her to hit up Asia because she's down to go.
I will go.
I think what's interesting is, as I sit back and listen to you tell your story, I feel like there are a few things that I would, if I was drafting up a little profile of Asia, I would say, one, creativity is central. Two, trying new things is not something she's afraid of, even if the results of that effort look different than what she anticipated. She's still going to learn from that experience. Three, that she's a connector. Four, that she really is able to write her own story, that she's not following a set path, that there's a specific example of a person who's done this, because you're willing to try different career paths, try different
Mhm.
educational paths to see if they work. And if they don't, you still take value from them to figure out how to apply them to do something
Right.
else you want to do. I feel like so these are the things I'm taking from your own story. I wonder if you were giving advice to a young person or a parent or a person that runs an organization that works with young people, what additional things would you say you would pull from your own identity? Oh, and she's a reader who
Right.
doesn't sleep very much, but it's because her mind is racist. She's always thinking about lots of different things and embracing that versus medicating that. So like, um, what are the things that you would say that you would encourage other adults to work to cultivate in the young people in their lives or in their families?
So I am auntie to 11. I have 11 nieces and nephews. And it's funny you say this. I had this conversation with my brother. We were talking about my nephew, who he's an artist. He can draw. Um, has always, like, since he was a little boy, and he likes to take things apart, put them back together. And he wants to go into auto mechanics. And
Hmm.
so my brother was worried about that and said, "Well, I was trying to get him to go into engineering." And he's sometimes they're young, they don't see the vision. And I said, let's look together at what he can do after high school if he takes this route of going to, say, like a vocational school. you know let's figure this out for him so that you can you know have the open conversation, because I understand as his father, you want you want to see him grow, and you don't want to see him hold himself back, right? And one of the things that I told my brother was, okay, he can go to this school, he can go do the whole track for auto mechanics. Then when he graduates, he's working, he has a job. But you know what? He can also go to community college and he can start there. And if he has any classes that he needs to make up, then he can do that at a lower cost because we all know how expensive college is. And then he can transfer and go into mechanical engineering if he wants to, because mature wise, everybody develops at a different age. I'm using that as an example because I think for kids and for parents, everybody sees a vision in a different time period, and I think that there always needs to be like a plan, a B plan, and a C plan. It might be easier for me to do that because my brain is always racing. But when I was a teacher and when I was an administrator in a school, I would always try and discuss that with the parent and say, like, you know, we can't control their path. We want to believe that we can, but that doesn't really help. But with kids, from a parent perspective, have some contingency plans along the way that you can present to them when they so that they are always open to talking to you about it. And I still have those same type of conversations with any teenager that I come across, like, hey, what is it that you want to do? I encourage them to think of a plan, B plan. Like, if you want to do one thing, what can you do with that one thing? What else can you do with it? If you want to be a writer, how or do you want to write books? Do you want to write for the movies? Do you want to do both? Do you want to write commercials? There's so many things that you can kind of put your buckets in, because the world has changed. That's number one. But also, two, if they do those different things, they might end up realizing, I don't want to be a writer at all. I don't want to do any of it. But they've gone through all the different avenues of that one thing to come to that realization. Um, and I've shared that with people. I think that's sound advice. It helps with some others not so much.
What was that? Did you live that? Like, did your parents talk to you about having a plan A, B, and C, or is that
Yeah,
again self-directed?
I think it was a little bit of both. It was so the plan for my mom and dad for me was stability, right? And so they pushed me into education because I grew up. My father raised his children as an educator, right? And so what he knew, and what we knew for all intents and purposes, my father had a great job. He was off in the summertime. He worked hard. We had, you know, a stable life. So, but the other options for me were presented were subliminal from my mom. Whereas, oh, you could try this out, you can try this. She wasn't exactly telling me to have a plan A and plan B. That's where I came in and said, okay, well, being a teacher is always going to pay my bills. I'm gonna try this summer when I'm off, and if it doesn't work out, it's fine because I can always go back to the classroom. And I still do that. I still do that. And I will continue to do it. I feel like, I think about now in my 40s, like I'm thinking about my next career. I might be on my seventh life, fourth, fifth.
Only your seventh, fourth, or fifth. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
And we have nine. I don't want to push it.
I feel you. Um, so what do you see? Have you started to? I know nobody from the library is watching, but have you started to think about a life past the library and how it is you plan to
Yeah.
utilize this experience towards that next life that you're working to create?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I have to be honest. I think being a part of Words Beats in Life has been very helpful and has been a motivating factor, because to see these kids, like you already know, I had a full circle moment because one of the fellows is actually a former student of mine.
Hmm.
And so that's very heartwarming to see their success, and to see how they've grown in a craft that I was teaching and was a part of creating and shaping for. And it kind of gave me on the back end a different type of confidence. When I've mentioned earlier, like being a writer, people they take that very personal. Some people don't share their writing. And I've always been that type of person where I'm like, I don't really share my writing. It's for me. I write for, um, necessity, right? And so when I have to do it, I'm doing it very well. But now the thought is like, well, wait a minute. I think I should shift it and really share what I'm doing. And so that's where I'm thinking, how is that going to look for me? Um, you know, do I want to be a part-time writer? Um, how do I want to dibble and dabble in it? Do I want to go back into teaching? But I do think that no matter what I do in the next 5 years, writing is going to be a part of that foundation. And I'm excited to go on that journey and to kind of hone in on that craft again.
That's got to be a little exciting to be a person that wants to move back into writing for audience or to share with audience and being in a library, like a place where people literally go to
Right.
find things to read.
It's one of those things where it was like knocking me on the head and I was ignoring it because, when I first came here, it was just like, it was an offshoot of education. My original job, I was a reading programs manager, managed a program to do basically what I was doing in the schools. I had clubs for reluctant readers. I taught, and my job as an English teacher was to really get kids engaged so that they could get through that required class to graduate from high school. And then I had this great program where it was less stress. Then all of a sudden, it's like I work in a library. I see authors all the time, all the time.
Hmm.
I go to book talks all the time. I rub elbows all the time with writers. What is going on? And I think once I kind of just got used to that culture, it just became like, you should go back to this because you have now this fruitful network to kind of see whether or not you can do it. And even if it's just for fun, it's still there.
I mean, this is a really great point. There's so many echoes with the conversation that I had yesterday with my good friend over at the Grammy chapter, with whom you share a love of a book, Tamara Wellens, around this idea that she actually went to school and got a degree to be a teacher, became a teacher, and then while being a teacher, started to study music on her own. And now she's a professional musician who is the president of the DC chapter of the
Wow.
Grammy Foundation. She did, in a similar way, she also needed to make sure she had a practical answer for work,
Right.
um, but could still pursue a dream. And so this idea that we live in a time now where you don't have to do the same thing for your entire
Mhm.
life. You can do it for a season, learn from it,
Mhm.
provide yourself that stability. Like she said, literally, I got this degree so I could buy a house and
Right.
not be like some of my artist friends who were struggling to be able to make their ends meet. And so the artist struggle is real, but also the second life artist or the third life
Right.
artist is also a thing that is ever at your disposal. As we get ready to wrap up, I wonder, um, what haven't I asked you about that you feel like, a young person who's thinking about college or thinking about the world of work should be thinking about that maybe no one's encouraged them to recognize or to realize. And it could be something as simple as the fact that you were willing to move to DC
Yeah.
for work, for an internship. The fact that you were willing to go after jobs that weren't necessary, that you didn't necessarily seem to be the right fit, but you fit. Because I also I find a lot, and this is I think more true. Studies have said that is more true for women than for men, is that women, generally speaking, of course, um, are more reluctant to apply for jobs that they don't know that they're qualified for,
Mm.
versus like I just applied for jobs and like you can tell me no, I'm not going to tell me no. Your job is to tell me no. So I didn't have a worry about rejection, because I wasn't invested in every single
Yeah.
ask. But I wonder, like, are there things that are maybe things that could be specific for young black girls or young girls or um, young people who don't necessarily have the kinds of parental and familial support that you had growing up that could still be of value to them?
So I think what you just said was very important because that is true. I have done that to myself multiple times as a woman. I've been like, oh, I don't think I can do that job, but um, nobody knows everything, and unless you did the job before, you're not going to know. There are transferable skill sets for many a jobs. If you can write, you know how to talk to people, and if you know how to build a relationship, you can do almost anything, really. Um, there of course there are specialized positions where that's not going to apply, but for the most part, if
Hold up,
you
I
know,
can't be a surgeon. I'm
you
kidding. Go
can't be a
ahead.
surgeon, you cannot be a surgeon. But when it comes to especially roles that are in the arts and organizations and things like that, don't sell yourself short. If you have those skills, or if you have two of those three skills, try and work on the third. Like, soft skills are so important. So that would be my feedback. Work on your soft skills. Think about how you speak to people, generally and on a day-to-day basis, and think about how you would like to be spoken to. Um, and just learn norms of all. When I moved to DC, it is 2.5 hours away from Philadelphia, 2.5 hours away from the South Jersey area that I grew up in. It's a very different culture. I did not come here and thinking that I knew everything. I came here and I attached myself to people with good energy, and I attached myself to learning the culture so I could adjust my soft skills so that I could be successful. If I had to move to any other city, I would do the same thing. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would share with anybody who's going to college, um, graduating from college, entering the work world. Understand the culture first before you make any rash or large decisions. Really just sit back and be willing to be a student over and over again. I think that's a really big thing that people need to understand.
You know, uh, I feel like folks our age talk about soft skills, but there's another thing that viewers could Google, which is 21st century skills, which are
Hmm.
things like critical thinking,
Yes.
communication skills, creativity, problem solving, perseverance, collaboration,
Yes.
um, and information literacy. Like most young people have no idea how many skills they already have
Right.
would be of use to someone who don't got them.
Who 100%. I teach that every single day, and I'm going to adapt that. 21st century skills is so important. Um, we, the cell phone, you're walking with a computer, like, it's all of those things are so, so important, and adapting those, depending on where you go, because there's still gaps. There's a lot of gaps depending on where you go. I 100% agree with that.
Well, Aisha, I want to thank you for making time to come and join us to share some of your journey. Looking forward to seeing what's next and continuing to collaborate with you. I'm super proud that you're a member of our board of directors, and even
Oh,
more
thank you.
proud that you're a member of our DC community and a resource for folks looking for collaborative opportunities with DC public libraries. Do you want to share any information for people to be able to contact you if they want to learn more about your work at DC public libraries?
Sure. So I am at MLK, Martin Luther King Memorial Library downtown in DC, and you can always come into the library and ask for me. I'm the first floor manager, but I can be reached on LinkedIn. Um, just, I guess, Asia Clark. I don't know what that is right now, so I probably shouldn't have said that. Or you can email me, aja.clark2, because there's some phantom Asia Clark out there. So asia.clark2@dc.gov, and you can reach out. And I'm always happy to answer people's questions and also just keep people abreast of all the things that go on here at the library, because there's a lot of great things.
This is definitely true. Asia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mozzie. Great.
Sorry, I cut you. You said
All right.
thanks, Mozzie. What?
I said, thanks, Mozzie. It's great to talk to you too.
You too. All right, everybody. This is year 3, day 5 of the alternative winter break. It's really been a joy. I hope you take the time to go back and look at 4 of the previous 5 days. One day my audio was terrible. We're working on fixing that and rebroadcasting it. But I've learned a lot. I hope you've learned some things you're willing to share with a young person in your life or apply to your own life if you're thinking about how to make some different choices to take advantage of opportunities that maybe you hadn't thought about in the media arts. If you're a young person between the ages of 12 and 22 or no one, consider enrolling in the Academy. I'm sitting in our headquarters in our DJ studio. Maybe learn a little bit more about our classes with this little commercial featuring our Academy director.
Enrolling in the Academy is really simple. You'll just go to our website, wblinc.org/academy. And when you get here, you'll see our main page and you can click enroll and it'll take you to this form where you're just gonna fill this out. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Once you submit this, you're enrolled in the Academy and you'll receive an email from me so you can pick the classes you'd like to take and join our Academy family. So we're an after-school program rooted in hip hop. So we have a bunch of classes that you may find interesting. You can go right to our website and go to our classes tab and you'll see some of them, from performing arts like hip hop theater, spoken word, hip hop dance, some of our business classes that are like a boss and walk it like I talk it, which would be more arts management and entrepreneur based. And then we also have things like our music classes, emceeing and rapping and beat production and DJing. You can go to wblinc.org/academy to enroll.